Hi everyone, my name is Shikha Gulhar and I'm a senior global product manager at Expedia Group. I am super thrilled to be part of Product School and be able to connect with you all via this webinar on one of my favorite topics, the product loops. And I consider this topic to be very fundamental and essential for all decision making, but that needs to happen by product managers, agnostic of the type of product or the domain of your product. So, without further ado, let's get started at a fully packed agenda for the session. The first one will be around defining what are product loops and the different types. And then I have in store for you some case studies of very successful products that have leveraged these types of loops for their success stories. And before we wrap up, we'll take a quick deep dive into what factor needs to be considered for us to adopt a loop for a product. Let's get started. So, a product loop is a systematic mechanism in place that is providing us with an opportunity to define, learn, and iterate through product strategies, facilitating organic growth and creating a seamless path of continuous reinvestment. So, the two primary objectives of any product loop is to help you with expanding and growing your product, as well as providing you inputs for a continuous reinvestment strategy. And by doing so, you're creating a sustainable advantage for your product as opposed to the competitive products. Now, there are four types of loops: data loop, compulsion loop, social loop, and viral. And let's start looking at each of these loops in detail. The first loop is data loop. What data loop sets in place is a feedback mechanism where every user interaction improves the experience of that and the other users. So in order for this loop to work, you need to look at four components: datafication, smart algorithms, adaptive UX, and a mechanism to collect feedback. Let's study how Netflix has been able to successfully adopt this loop for its phenomenal win story. The very first component is datafication. Datafication is primarily a process of encoding user activity and preferences, or in other words, it is encoding the interaction of the user. So at the time of sign-in, Netflix starts to ask you questions like choose the three tiles of your choice, or list down the device preference. By doing so, Netflix has started to build a context of you and your preferences. And the context building doesn't stop here. There are multiple touch points that are put in place on the platform that is monitoring and recording your interaction. Some of the noteworthy touch points are more like this module, or the math score, which basically defines a numeric value to every title on the grid basis your past choices and preferences. And it's not just the data point, the aesthetic aspect is also monitored and captured by what basically Netflix tried to do is run multiple A/B tests on different design appeals, and the user engagement and interaction to these design appeals are then noted. Now that we have multiple click streams flowing from these touch points, all these click streams are then fed to the next component, which is the algorithm. So algorithm is nothing but smart self-learning machine models, which are built in a way to capture all these click streams as input or vectors, and then come up with the most contextual personalized output. Now, in the words of Netflix itself, get the right titles in front of each of our members at the right time is the main objective of personalization of content. But even if we personalize the content or come up with the most contextual output, that is still half of the story. The other half of the story gets completed in terms of how do you render this output. And in order to do so, you need to look for an adaptive UX presentation layer. Now, by adaptive UX layer, we mean that your user interface should be defined or designed in a manner that it can encapsulate this complex output and render it in a way which promotes easy, seamless consumption. So the grid design or the revolving pictures, the easy scroll option, the powerful search, or even the variation that is in place for mobile versus desktop are some of the very powerful UX designs that support adaptive UX approach. And then moving on to the fourth and a very important component is the feedback. In fact, data loop is also called a feedback loop because from the very definition itself that we are trying to monitor every interaction so that we can improve the product for that member and the others means that you need to actually collect feedback at each of these touch points. For Netflix recommendation engine, the feedback can be collected at two levels. One is the macro and micro level. The macro level feedback can come from how many users watched a particular episode, how many users watched an entire series. On an individual level, the feedback loop can be when you pause, rewind, or fast forward. What are your browsing and scrolling habits? What is the device preference? What time of the day do you watch series? And what day of the week do you prefer to watch? Are all valuable feedback points that need to be fed into this engine. Now, the most important question comes is how do you measure success? Now, if you're saying that your product should improve, what is the primary metrics that you want to measure for this improvement? The answer is engagement. When we say engagement, we are not only monitoring the engagement on the live sessions, we also monitor the engagement via the omni-channel strategy that we have created for our product. Now on to the next loop, which is the compulsion loop. Compulsion loop is also called the habit forming loop as it sets in place a series of steps designed to induce habit and repeat behavior for a given time frame. In order for this loop to be successfully implemented, you need to look at four different components: triggers, action, variable reward, and feedback. And this loop has been successfully adopted by many gaming products and successful social media apps. So for today's case study, let's look at the product Candy Crush, how it has adopted the compulsion loop for its own success. But before we go into each of the component with respect to Candy Crush as a product, let's quickly understand what BJ Fogg behavioral model is all about. So BJ Fogg is a behavioral psychologist, and he believes that the three elements need to converge together for a human behavior to be driven. These three elements are trigger, ability, and motivation. Now, these also are the three components of the compulsion loop. So let's start looking at each of these components in detail. The very first component is trigger. Trigger are nothing but basically cues that inspire action. So in case of Candy Crush, the trigger is the match 3 puzzle games. Comes from the same celebrated genre that has been successfully adopted by many other games like Zuma, Bejeweled, Jewel Quest. So this trigger is built on a simple premise that our brain enjoys looking for pattern and sequence. And even as kids, we were thrilled to, play puzzles or bring the shapes together. And that's what makes this game super easy to understand and simple to play. Now, while that is a very strong trigger, we need to have an ability to act upon this trigger. So in reference to Candy Crush, their colorful and stunning user flows and design and easy swipe option makes it super easy for a gamer to play this game from level to another level. Now that you have a trigger and an ability to act upon that trigger, the next piece that is very important that ensures that there is a habit formation is ample amount of motivation. Now, the motivation comes in the form of variable rewards, which actually induces a dopamine effect. Now, the variable rewards means that the schedule of getting a reward is uncertain, and the way the reward is provided is through disproportionate feedback. So in case of Candy Crush, you at times see glaring lights or sound bites when you successfully complete a certain flow or successfully complete a level. Now, having this disproportionate feedback, it is giving you an illusion that you're fully in control of this game rather than being just a victim to this very clever system. And then again, from the respect of reinvestment into the loop, we need to devise strategies in terms of how do we collect feedback. Feedback is very important for every product in general, but more specifically, here's a case on how Candy Crush devised or had this strategy around feedback and learned from it. So the case I have for you here is the infamous level 65. As some of you who have played the game may be aware of it, that level 65 was considered as a super hard level to crack. This was introduced as the last level in the second upgrade of the game. And what the developers of the game started monitoring was that in general, there were about 120 plus attempts that were required to crack this level. And due to this being a super complex level, there was a 50% dropout rate. But instead of being becoming a reason for abandoning the game or demotivating people, this started to show up as a very strong trigger, and hence they started monitoring very or capturing very high revenue and higher conversion, which meant that people were coming again and again playing this game to crack this level, and also new users joined this game just to reach to level 65 and try to solve it. So, what this case study shows here is that whether the feedback is good or bad, it is giving you an opportunity to pivot or iterate through your product strategies for the improvement and expansion of the product in the right direction. And as I have called out multiple times as part of this loop, that this is the habit forming loop. So the primary metrics that actually maps to this habit formation is the daily repeat rate. And here I have some new snippets for you that shows that, you know, how over the years, the makers of Candy Crush, Kings.com, have been able to successfully work on the strategies to keep the daily repeat rate high. So in 2013, London's Daily Mail had called this game as insanely addictive game with 7.4 million daily users worldwide. And then again in 2019, there was another article published by The Guardian stating that there were 9 million players of Candy Crush game playing this game every day for 3 hours or more. And there are many more such stats and information online that shows that for year over year, this game continued to be one of the addictive game just because the strategies were laid out in place to induce habit forming and improve the daily repeat rate. Now moving on to something social. So the third loop is called the social loop. It is the loop that has been celebrated by many social media apps like Insta, Facebook, Tinder, Twitter, LinkedIn. Now, what this loop sets in motion is that it facilitates cultivation of profile. Then through these profiles, user-generated content is created. You need to put in strategies for curation of this content for easy consumption, and then have a feedback mechanism in place to understand how this content is being collected on your platform or ecosystem. So let's see and understand this loop from the lens of Medium. Medium is a social blogging site. The very first component for this loop is cultivating profiles. By cultivating profiles, we are primarily talking about creating user accounts of your product. Now, in order to define what user account should be, you need to look from two segments. One is the content producer, and what will be the metadata or entities that you would like to highlight. And the other one is with respect to who will be the content consumers and what will be their consumption needs. So in case of Medium, feels like bio or photo thumbnail adds a lot of personalization to the profile, and it allows also the consumer who's come here to read articles get an insight not just about the articles but also about you as a blogger. Uh, Medium may not be the best example in terms of defining profiles, but products like Facebook and Tinder, they spend tons of money and heavy research undergoes to defining what this profile should be look like, what are the different entities that needs to be captured, and what is the best way to surface these entities. But whether the profile is complex or simple, at the end of the day, another key element that needs to be considered as part of this component is easy onboarding of profiles. The next component of this loop is strategies in place to create content. Now, in order for content to be created, we again need to look at BJ Fogg's model of trigger, motivation, and ability to act. For social content to be created on your platform or for your product, the trigger can come from both intrinsic as well as extrinsic factors. For example, you may have read a tweet on Twitter on one of your favorite topics, or somebody on Medium itself have defined or called out an article on your area of interest, and that kind of motivates you to go in and write an article by yourself. So with that trigger and motivation in place, you need to have the right set of tools to make it super easy for a content creator to create the content. The third loop is very similar to the data loop. Here we switch gears from content creators to content consumers and their needs. In order to understand that what are the needs or what are the main interest of a content consumer, you need to start building context. So in order to make this happen, very similar to data loop, you will start to capture the context of this consumer against certain tags or predefined taxonomy of data. This data needs to flow in the form of click streams to smart algorithms, which will then spit out output that can act as recommendations. And these recommendations will come in the form of articles that can be shared with you basis your interest. Now, as these articles are surfaced on the product or on the platform, what is next monitored is your engagement on these articles. The engagement in this case can come in terms of following the blogger or applauding, or even on the negative side, muting the author or reporting the story. But every interaction is then fed back to the system to make better choices or the better recommendation for the next use. So that's where the collect feedback process also comes into the picture. Again, for this component to work, you need to look from the perspective of a content consumer and a content producer. In terms of a content consumer, the main objective is to keep him or her engaged. But in terms of content creator, the objective is slightly different. Here, the main objective is to build a social currency for the profiler or the blogger. By social currency, what I mean is that the number of followers or the likes you receive on your profile, or even the likes you receive on the articles that you have published, all jointly create a social currency for your profile, which is also called the reputation of your profile. Now, reputation is such a strong motivating factor that it actually induces you to create more and more content in future on the same platform. And with this, the final measuring success of this loop is the publishing rate of user-generated content on your ecosystem. So whether it is the comments and threads that are being posted by consumers, or it is the profile, the way the profiles are being magnified and the number of articles that are being pushed for each of the genre or categories, that all should account for the user-generated content, and it's the publishing rate that needs to be monitored for this content over and over iterations. Now to our final loop, which is the viral loop. As the name suggests, this loop is in place to make your product go viral. And for that to happen, you need to have four components in place. Ability for you to get to bring people to hear about your product. Then they can use the product, evaluate it, and finally entice them to go out and share this product with others. What can be a better example to understand the this loop as against any other product than TikTok? So for product TikTok, the very first component is hear about it, which means that you need to lure users from other social media platforms to come and start trying your product. Now let's see how this or what set of strategies were adopted by ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok. Back in 2017, ByteDance acquired another rival app called Musical.ly and merged the two apps together. Now, with that, all the accounts of Musical.ly were migrated to TikTok. By then, Musical.ly had already penetrated into US market and had a strong US base. So this was considered as a strategy to bring TikTok on US soil. But that was just the beginning. Furthermore, post this acquisition, tons of money was spent on advertising campaigns over different social media platforms. As you can see, there was $1 billion advertising campaign that was run just on Snapchat itself. And this strategy still continues, as in 2020, the ad spends had jumped by 75 times from merely May to November. So now that you have got enough people to come and start trying your product, the final litmus test lies on how is your product. So anybody who first comes and looks at the product, features like video first UI, simple and easy onboarding, and frictionless way of creation and consumption are some key features that helps a new user to start enjoying and exploring the product. And once the onboarding is completed, then the next phase of evaluation start. Now, according to a key investor of TikTok, the actual product itself is artificial intelligence, and this maps to their For You algorithm. This algorithm is set in place in such a powerful way that it not only monitors the engagement of every video that's being completed at an individual member level, but it is also provides a very strong, powerful search engine that can allow you to search via popular hashtags or sound bites. Also on the content creator side, if you are new onto the platform and you just have your first few content created, this content is exposed to a niche group. And this group is also formulated through this algorithm where local relevancy and other preferences are taken into account so that you can get the best opportunity to make your content visible to the community. And then gradually the more measures or steps are taken to make your content visible to the bigger community on TikTok. Now, with all these steps and measure in place, it not only encourages you to stay hooked to the product itself, but it also helps or motivates you to go and share this content on other social media platforms. And that's where the fourth component comes into picture, which is enticing the user to share with others. Now, it is not as simple as just providing a list of 5 or 6 social media platforms and allowing your users to go and share this content there. For a product manager, it is very important to understand where would you like your content and your product to be shared on which type of social media platforms. For example, you wouldn't want to surface or even provide the ability to share TikTok videos on LinkedIn. So it is equally important to understand where would you see your content being shared so that you can kickstart the next iteration of the loop for luring new people to come and try the product. Now, viral loop looks into the success metric as virality rate, but there is a bigger limitation with this as the primary metrics. It only is looking from the aspect of growth and expansion, and it is not considering the path to reinvestment. Therefore, in order for your product to be able to not only grow organically, but you need to have enough input for reinvestment, this loop needs to work in conjunction with another loop that can actually induce that reinvestment. So in case of TikTok, the other loop that works well with the viral loop is the social loop. This is so because these two loops have very different jobs to do. On the growth side or on the viral side, every new video that is created, the loop will push this to be shared on different social media platforms. But on the social loop side, the measures or the strategies would be put in place so that the loop, your content is shared with the bigger community. You receive views, likes, and comments. That helps in building social reputation, and that further induces you to create more and more content. So it is these two loops that together ensure that you are not only growing your user base, but you're also ensuring that there is strong retention and satisfaction amongst the existing users. Okay, on to our final slide before the wrap up. Very quickly, I'd like to make you all understand what is the primary factor that helps anybody to understand which is the right loop for my product. Now, in order to understand this, one needs to first have a clear understanding of your product market fit. For your product market fit, what it helps you to define is a thesis of your product, which is what is the job to be done? How do you think this job can be done? And then what are the strategies that need to come in place in order to implement this job? So what job needs to be done directly maps to the undeserved needs. How to do this job directly equates with value proposition feature sets. And then the way you would like to implement is the business strategies. And once you start defining these business strategies, you then start looking towards a mechanism that can continue supporting these business strategies with giving you enough input on how to reiterate in future, grow, as well as reinvest. And that's what is the answer to the loop that works best for your product. Now, as an example, for Amazon and companies like Alibaba, data loop is their primary loop because it helps in defining strategies at company level, and it directly relates to their main metrics, which is conversion. However, the module Q&A, which is present on the vendor pages on Amazon, is a very, very neat example of social loop. So what I'm trying to explain here is that even though you will have one major macro loop that is mapping your company strategy, depending on the type of feature, or if in case you have adopted a viral loop, then you need to have another loop in conjunction to that, and that is required, and therefore the understanding of all these different loops and when and which loop to fit in is quite essential. Okay, quick wrap up. So loops provide your product a sustainable advantage by creating a systematic mechanism of growth and reinvestment. Data loops define core strategies to improve the product with every use and interaction. Compulsion loop hooks you to the product with a cycle of trigger, motivation, and easyability. Social loop provides a constant feedback mechanism to create more UGC from the perspective of content consumer and content producer. Viral loop spins up a cycle for organic growth, but needs to work in conjunction with another loop for reinvestment strategy. And then finally, knowledge of product market fit helps in evaluating the loop best suited for your product. All right, that takes us to the end of the session. I'm hoping this was an insightful session and helped you understand the different loops and how these have been implemented by successful products. Plus, I'm hoping you can also take these lessons to understand what is your company's primary loop, or what loops do you think you can consider for your products or features. And also, I have listed here my LinkedIn handle. I'll be happy to connect with you through LinkedIn for any questions and queries, as well as I'm looking forward to many more interactions with you all in future. Thank you.